She was already halfway into the aisle when the man in her seat lifted his chin and said, "This is mine." His voice loud enough to pull every eye in business class. The boarding pass in her hand showed 3A, and the screen above her head showed 3A, and she said calmly that this was her seat, and he smiled the thin smile of someone who thinks rules bend for him and said, "Sit somewhere else, sweetheart." The flight attendant glanced between them and said, "We will sort it out in a moment, ma'am." But the man was already waving to another attendant like he owned the sky, and the moment began to stretch like plastic in heat. She kept her voice level and said, "My name is Lena Cole, and 3A is mine." The man laughed and said, "Lena who?" And someone behind them whispered that she was that app Billionaire, the girl who bought and rebuilt 3 hospitals after her mother died. And the whisper spread like a spark under dry leaves. Phones rose just a little. Curious eyes watching the scene turned strange as the man in 3A folded his arms and said, "The agent upgraded me at the gate. Not my problem. Take it up with them." And the attendant nodded mechanically and asked Lena to step aside for a second, please, just for takeoff. Just until we confirm the upgrade. Her jaw flexed, but her eyes stayed steady, and she said, "I will wait right here." The plane hummed with recycled air and impatience, and the pilot's voice rolled in warm and distant, telling everyone to fasten seatbelts as they had a tight departure window. A child coughed, a suitcase thumped into an overhead bin, and in that tangle of sounds, Lena noticed something tiny wedged in the seat pocket of 3A, a corner of paper that was not the color of airline magazines, darker, crumpled, a deep brown smear across it like old wine, the kind of color that makes your skin remember fear before your mind does. She felt the pull of it, but the attendant stepped forward again with a practiced smile and said, "Ms. Cole, can I ask you to take 9C for now? We will reconcile the manifest after Wheels Up. We appreciate your cooperation." And the man in 3A leaned back smug and said, "Thanks, sweetheart." Then he straightened the seatbelt and closed his eyes as if the scene were finished. As if he had not just taken something that was not his and turned the truth into fog, Lena exhaled slowly and slid into 9C without a word. Not surrendering, but calculating. The cabin shifted into the muted choreography of takeoff. The tug of movement, the thunk of latches. The hush that falls when people decide to behave for a while. Yet her gaze stayed locked on the pocket of 3A and on the man who guarded it without knowing what he guarded. And the whisper of intuition kept brushing the back of her neck like cold cloth, telling her to look again, telling her that something was wrong beyond arrogance and entitlement. The plane pushed back, and the safety demo began with bright smiles and empty cadence, masks and exits and seatbelts, while a storm of quiet anger swirled under Lena's ribs. She leaned forward to stow her bag, and her fingers brushed the edge of her own boarding pass, and she saw it then, a faint fingerprint near the seat number, a small rusty arc now drying, not hers, not from any paper cut. It looked like the shadow of a wound, and the hairs on her arms rose because the new attendant at the front door had gloved hands for no medical reason, and the gate agent who scanned her had never raised their eyes. The aircraft began its slow roll toward the runway, and the cabin lights faded to a gentle dusk. Outside the tarmac, lights smeared into threads, and the city glittered like a broken bowl beneath the wing. Lena's chest tightened with the memory of another corridor in another building where a nurse had said, "We are doing all we can," and grief sharpened into focus. No one would take something from her again without a fight, not a seat, not her dignity, not the safety of the people strapped into this metal tube trusting strangers with their lives. She unbuckled in one swift motion, drawing a sharp hey from the attendant across the aisle. She raised her hands in a calming gesture and said, "I just need to stretch," then moved forward 2 rows like a tide slipping past a rock. The man in 3A cracked an eye and smirked until she leaned toward the pocket and said, "Excuse me," and with a single decisive motion she pulled the dark paper free. The attendant hissed, "Ma'am, please return to your seat." But the cabin had already tipped into curiosity again, eyes swiveling, phones angling low, the engines humming louder as the runway drew near. The paper was heavier than it looked, damp at the edges, creased like it had been clenched hard by a shaking hand. She unfolded it and saw the first line scrawled in frantic ink, and her breath snagged because the words began with a plea. "Do not let her sit here," and the next line was worse. "There is something under 3A, and below it a shaky arrow pointing down toward the metal under the cushion. And the brown smear. Across the bottom was not wine and not grease, and her entire body knew it, and the entire cabin felt the tremor in her voice when she said to the attendant very clearly, "We need the captain." Now the man in 3A laughed and said, "Is this a prank? What are you doing?" But something slipped in his eyes then. A flicker like a curtain in a draft, and Lena saw his left hand move toward the armrest controls and not in any normal way, fingers groping along the seam where the plastic met the seat frame. The attendant wavered between training and disbelief. Another attendant picked up the interphone with a shaky hand. The plane slowed for a moment and then rolled again, momentum building. The world compressing into the thin air of decisions. Lena knelt and pressed her palm flat against the carpet beside 3A. The floor vibrated like a nervous heartbeat. She slid her fingers under the seat frame and felt torn fabric where there should have been smooth plastic, and her thumb scraped against adhesive that was too strong to be random. Not the soft Velcro of airline kits, but something harsher. Something that belonged to a warehouse, not a cabin. The man snapped, "Leave it," and kicked her hand away, his heel glancing off her knuckles. And the mask of casual arrogance tore away from his face, leaving the raw edge of panic. Passengers gasped. The attendant reached for him and missed. He shoved back and his shoe clipped the aisle. A child cried out. Someone shouted for security, but security was a memory at the gate. Now receding in the dusk behind the taxiing aircraft, Lena stood and lifted the note high. Her voice ringing with steel, "Captain now." And the attendant finally spoke into the phone with a tone that cut through the hum like a blade. Possible threat in cabin, possible device under 3A, request immediate halt. The plane shuddered as if deciding between motion and stillness. The engines swelled, then softened. A sudden silence bloomed and collapsed as the metal bird hesitated on the brink of flight. The man in 3A lunged for the pocket, as if to snatch the note from her hand, but failed. Two passengers rose instinctively to block him. The child's crying cut off mid-sob, and the whole cabin held its breath as the intercom clicked and the captain's voice came back transformed. "All crew stations remain where you are, Tower. We are aborting takeoff. Ground, we require immediate assistance." Blue lights burst along the taxiway like stars falling to earth. The plane's brakes gripped hard and every head snapped forward. Bags thumped, hearts pounded. The man in 3A finally stopped pretending and stared straight ahead as if a script had ended and a new one had begun. Lena did not blink. She kept the note raised like a flag and felt the weight of 100 lives leaning with her choice. The attendant crouched and mouthed "thank you" as if prayer had breached procedure. And then a new sound rolled up the aisle from the forward galley, a dull hidden clink. A small mechanical sigh from beneath 3A that did not belong to any seat on any airline. The lights flickered once. The note in her hand trembled, and someone whispered a single word that made the cabin go perfectly still. "Bomb?" Every face in the cabin froze as if the word itself had turned their blood into stone. The man in 3A pressed his back hard against the seat, eyes darting not with the arrogance of before, but with the wild flicker of someone cornered. Lena held her ground in the aisle, gripping the crumpled note. The plane had halted, but the silence was worse than motion. Engines whining low like a predator pacing outside the cage. The attendant's hand shook as she repeated into the phone, "There may be a device under seat 3A. Request immediate ground security and evacuation. Repeat immediate." The captain's voice came through again, calm but clipped. "Remain seated. Do not touch the seat. Maintain cabin order." And already the plane was crawling with tension, passengers whispering sharp and fast. One man fumbling with his belt only for his wife to pull him back down, hissing, "Don't move." A teenager's phone tilted up, catching shaky footage of Lena still standing unbuckled, hair framing a face carved from determination. And in that frame, the man in 3A looked smaller, cornered, his hand twitching as though still searching for control. In a moment that had dissolved beyond his reach, Lena's knuckles throbbed where his heel had struck, but she ignored the sting. Her focus knifed into the space under the seat, the smell rising faintly like burned plastic mixed with metal, a scent she had learned once in a hospital wing after a generator fire. Sharp and wrong, the attendant crouched but dared not touch it. She whispered, "I think I see wiring," and drew back pale. Lena's voice, steady but fierce, cut through the buzz. "We cannot wait for protocol. If that thing is armed, time is bleeding out now." The man in 3A blurted, "Shut up, it's nothing. It's just a battery pack I dropped." But the words trembled hollow, each syllable betraying him more than protecting. Security trucks raced into view outside the windows, blue lights splashing across faces drained of color. But the jetway was still far behind. No bridge yet, no exit path. They were sealed in a metal tube with uncertainty ticking beneath them. Lena turned on him and said, "Why here, why me?" Her voice not asking but demanding, and his lips curled with bitterness. "You rich people think you're untouchable. This was never supposed to happen." His jaw snapped shut too late, revealing too much, and suddenly the whispers of passengers turned sharp as knives against him. The illusion of anonymity shattered. The attendant at the rear tried to calm the cabin, voice raised over the hum. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain calm. We are safe." The aircraft is secure, but her own eyes betrayed the lie, darting toward the front where two men pressed against the aisle, ready to pin 3A's occupant if he lunged again. Lena stepped closer, the note crumpled tight in her palm, and she said softly but with an edge that cut through the hush, "What were you planning to do when we were airborne?" The man's throat worked as he swallowed. Silence stretched until it cracked with his mutter, "You would all have learned not every empire survives takeoff." The captain's door opened a fraction. Eyes visible, scanning, then locked back. Procedure wrapped around fear. Outside footsteps pounded up metal stairs as ground security scrambled toward the sealed cabin. Passengers leaned into windows wide-eyed, but Lena did not move. She felt the weight of her mother's voice echo from years ago, when grief had almost drowned her. "Do not let fear choke you. Stand or fall, but never bend." And now she stood again, against entitlement, against arrogance, against terror stitched into cushions. The engines groaned down into silence. Brakes hissed. A pop of suction marked the jetway pressing against the forward door. But even with help so near, the tension in the cabin grew jagged. A child whimpered. Someone muttered a prayer. And Lena bent closer to the man in 3A, whispering only for him, "If you planted that, you will not leave this plane alive." His eyes widened, sweat cutting tracks across his temple, and he snapped louder than intended. "You don't understand, it's not just me. They're already here." And the words spilled into the air like acid, corroding what fragile calm remained. Gasps ripped across the cabin, heads turning in every direction, suspicion scattering like sparks. The attendant's lips parted in disbelief. Lena's heart clenched with the sick weight of realization that this seat, this fight, this moment was not isolated. It was a trigger, a crack in a larger wall, and the question pressed sharp against her skull. Who else is here? Who among the rows of frightened faces hides the same secret? Who is about to stand when everyone else is desperate to sit still? The captain's door swung open at last. Two uniformed men from ground security surged in, weapons low but ready, and the man in 3A stiffened like a cornered animal. His hand twitched toward the seam of the seat again. Lena flung her body forward, gripping his wrist with the strength of someone who had once wrestled grief itself. The note fluttered to the floor. The passengers gasped as one, and in that frozen breath before security pinned him, Lena's eyes flicked across the cabin. Caught a glance too quick to be normal. A young woman in row 5 sliding her hand into a bag too carefully. Too slowly. The security officers dragged him to the floor, shouting commands. Passengers cheered, then hushed in the same breath. But Lena's focus locked onto row 5, where the woman's eyes met hers for one shattering instant. Dark, calm eyes that said, "This is not over." And Lena felt the air shift heavy with a new truth. The device under 3A might be only one piece. The note only one warning, the flight only one stage. And as the door finally cracked open to release the trapped passengers into the arms of flashing lights, Lena whispered to herself, "And no one else, the game has just begun." The passengers poured into the jet bridge like water escaping a broken dam. Voices overlapping in relief and panic, flight attendants herding them forward with tight smiles that fooled no one. Lena stepped out, last her eyes never leaving row 5, where the young woman with the calm, dark eyes blended seamlessly into the flow. Security's focus locked on the man from 3A, now cuffed and snarling about mistakes and rights. But Lena felt her gut tug her toward the other one, the one who had not made a scene but had radiated intent with every small motion. The terminal beyond was chaos, lights flashing, alarms blaring, police dogs pacing restless, travelers craning necks for glimpses of drama. Lena drifted near the woman from row 5, who carried her bag pressed tight to her ribs. Their shoulders nearly brushed. Lena's voice, low and steady, said, "You left your fear behind in that seat." The woman's stride hitched only for a fraction, then smoothed. Her face turned just enough to show the ghost of a smile, and she replied softly, "No billionaire can buy what's coming." Then she melted into the tide of bodies funneled toward security screening. Lena froze in the current of movement as the words bit into her skin. The ache in her knuckles flared, and she knew this was deeper than one planted device. Her mother's memory rose again, not as comfort, but as reminder of loss. She had built her empire on grit and grief, yet standing here she felt how fragile it all was. One hidden enemy and everything she had created could collapse in seconds. She forced her breath even and scanned the crowd until a uniformed officer grabbed her elbow, asking, "Ma'am, did you place this call to the captain? Did you find the note?" She nodded and handed the crumpled paper still stained with dread. His brows furrowed as he read. His radio crackled with clipped commands. The man from 3A was dragged past shouting half-coherent claims. You don't get it. She wasn't supposed to be on this flight. She wasn't supposed to be here. His words twisted in Lena's chest, confirmation and warning. She realized with sick clarity that she had been the target, not the plane, not the strangers around her. The seat was bait. Her name printed on the manifest had triggered this entire storm. And if that was true, then the calm woman in row 5 was not finished. She was only adjusting the planned security funneled passengers into holding areas. Announcements echoed overhead about delays and investigations. Lena slipped out of the cluster and followed her instinct like a hound on a scent. She caught sight of the woman near a restroom corridor. Their eyes met again, and this time the woman did not look away. Instead, she tilted her head as if inviting Lena closer. A dare, a challenge. And against reason, Lena followed her into the echoing tiled hallway, where the noise of the terminal dulled to a hush. The woman stood by the mirror, adjusting her scarf. The bag on the counter unzipped just enough to show a glint of metal. Lena's heart kicked hard, but her steps did not falter. She said, "Who sent you?" The woman chuckled low and said, "Do you really think you made all that money without enemies? You tore down companies like they were toys. You made families beg for mercy while you built your kingdom. And now you think you're untouchable." Lena's throat tightened not from guilt but from rage. She stepped closer and hissed back, "I never ruined lives, I rebuilt them when no one else would. Hospital, schools, clean water where there was none. If someone bled, it was greed that cut them, not me." The woman's smile faded into something harder. She lifted the bag just slightly and said, "The world only sees what you show them, billionaire. Tonight it will see something else." Lena lunged, instinct taking over. Her hand clamped the woman's wrist, forcing the bag back down. The counter rattled. A stall door swung open as a frightened passenger fled. The woman's eyes burned as she whispered, "You can stop me here, but you cannot stop all of us. There are more." And the weight of that truth nearly buckled Lena's knees. Footsteps thundered into the restroom. Security shouting commands, weapons raised. The woman's face relaxed into eerie calm as if capture meant nothing. Lena released her grip just enough for the officers to seize her. They wrestled her to the floor, cuffing her hands. The bag clattered open, revealing wires tangled around a black box no larger than a book. Gasps filled the tiled chamber. Lena pressed back against the wall chest, heaving. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman still standing but shadowed with the knowledge that this night was no longer about one flight or one seat. It was about a war waged in silence around her as they dragged the woman away. She turned her head and said over her shoulder, "This was only a rehearsal. The real collapse hasn't even started." The words followed Lena out into the glare of the terminal like a curse. Passengers stared, whispering, "Billionaire, billionaire." Phones lifted, capturing her every move. And though she stood in the center of a crowd, she felt a chill of isolation sink deep. Because the note had warned of one seat, but the conspiracy whispered of many. And the question now burned inside her like fire. Who else is coming for her, and how many seats are already marked? Lena was escorted into a private security room away from the chaos of the terminal. Cameras blinked red in the corners. A heavy metal table sat between her and 3 officials who spoke in clipped tones. They asked her to recount everything from the moment she boarded to the moment the second woman was taken. Lena repeated it steady, but inside her mind spun faster than her words. Every detail replayed like shards of glass. The arrogant smile of the man in 3A, the note with the brown smear, the calm eyes of the woman in row 5, and finally the whisper that this was only a rehearsal. The phrase gnawed like acid at the edges of her focus. One officer leaned in, asking, "Why would they target you specifically?" Lena lifted her chin and said, "Because my name is bigger than my body. My work has made me a mirror people either love or hate. I've built hospitals where others closed them. I've pulled profit out of companies that left employees starving. Every step left someone furious. I've known for years there were whispers against me, but never like this." The officer scribbled while the others exchanged uneasy looks. Then the door opened and a federal agent stepped in, trench coat damp from rain, his gaze sharp as a blade. He placed a sealed folder on the table and said, "Ms. Cole, we have reason to believe this was not isolated. A string of similar warnings has surfaced in the last week across 3 airports." The words dropped like stones into her chest. Lena's pulse quickened. She asked flatly what kind of warnings. The agent opened the folder, revealing photographs of notes written in the same frantic scrawl, each with smears of rust or blood, each pointing to specific seats, each intercepted before flights departed, he said quietly. Whoever planted these has inside knowledge of boarding manifests. They knew seat assignments in advance, and in every case the name flagged was someone influential. Political, corporate, or in your case, billionaire philanthropist. Lena's lips tightened. The pattern clicked together like teeth. This was not random terrorism. It was targeted revenge, and she was only the face of a larger strike. Her mind reeled back to the woman in row 5 saying, "You cannot stop all of us." The truth was now undeniable. This was organized, layered, designed not just to kill but to humiliate, to drag names through blood and fire. Lena rose from her chair, her voice iron. "We cannot sit here with paperwork while others board planes. Someone is already moving on the next flight." The agent regarded her for a long moment, then nodded curtly and said, "Come with me. You've just been drafted whether you like it or not." And against all logic, she felt relief because silence was no longer an option. They moved through underground corridors into a secure hangar where flashing lights painted metal walls. The woman from row 5 was shackled to a chair, her face calm as a sleeping cat. Wires still dangling from the bag on a nearby table, technicians swarming around it. Lena stood across from her and asked, "Why me, why tonight?" The woman lifted her eyes and said, "Because you symbolize survival, and survival must be broken. People look at you and think hope can be bought. We will prove them wrong." Lena's fists clenched, but she forced her voice low. "You think destruction teaches? It only hardens the world against you." The woman's lips curled. "That's what you billionaires never understand. We are not here to teach. We are here to erase." The agent gestured Lena back and said, "Don't engage." But Lena leaned closer anyway and whispered, "You failed tonight." And the woman whispered back, "Not yet," then let out a small laugh that echoed off the hangar walls like a crack-splitting stone. Security rushed her away, but the echo clung to Lena's ribs, the word rehearsal hammering louder with every heartbeat. Hours later, as dawn bled into the windows of a quiet lounge, Lena sat with a cup of untouched coffee staring at her phone screen. Messages poured in from media outlets desperate for comment. Headlines already screaming "Billionaire saves flight." Seat sabotage foiled, but she knew the truth was darker. Her phone buzzed again, this time, not from media but from an unknown number. She opened it to find a single photo, grainy but clear enough. A boarding pass with tomorrow's date, another airport, another seat, and scrawled across it in the same frantic hand were the words "Next collapse." Her stomach dropped. The message had reached her directly, and the battle had just shifted into her own hands. She gripped the phone tight as if holding back the future, determination burning under her skin. This was no longer about money or empire or even survival. This was about ending something that would not stop until it was buried. She rose from her seat and said aloud, though no one was near, "They chose me because they think I will bend. But I will not." And with that, she strode toward the waiting agent, her next steps already written in the fire of her chest, unaware that in the shadows of the lounge a figure stood watching, another passenger from the halted flight. A face she had not noticed before, eyes cold and unblinking, already dialing a number to say she knows too much. The sun climbed higher, yet the light did not soften the weight pressing on Lena's shoulders. She sat inside the secure van, rumbling toward another terminal. The agent beside her scanning updates on a tablet, his jaw tight. He said, "The boarding pass photo you received is real. Someone leaked tomorrow's manifest. The name marked belongs to a senator scheduled to fly at dawn." Lena's chest burned with dread. This was escalating. First her, now government officials. Tomorrow it could be anyone with power or influence. She whispered, "They are not just hunting me. They are hunting symbols." The agent gave a grim nod and said, "Symbols shake nations." Her phone buzzed again. Another message, this time a video clip. Shaky footage from a handheld camera showing the arrested woman from row 5 inside her holding cell. Her lips moving in words too faint to hear, but her eyes staring straight into the lens as if speaking across the bars directly to Lena. Then the clip ended with a flash of red letters across the screen reading, "This isn't over." Lena's hand trembled, but she swallowed the fear down. Rage taking its place, she thought of her mother again. The hospitals she had built in her name. The children she had sworn to protect. She would not let terror dismantle what love had created. They reached a restricted hangar where security briefings unfolded in tense voices, maps of airports spread across tables, agents tracing possible infiltrations. Lena stood among them, though she was not trained like they were. Her voice cut through their jargon. "You are chasing shadows, but the core is clear. They knew my seat before I did. They knew the senator's seat. Someone inside your system is feeding them. Until you find the leak, you are only patching cracks." The room stilled, eyes turned, and for the first time they regarded her not as a victim, but as someone who saw angles they missed. The agent who had stayed by her side nodded slowly and said, "Then we make you bait." The words hung heavy, but Lena did not flinch. She said, "If I sit in that seat tomorrow, I draw them out." The agent countered, "It is too dangerous." She shot back, "It was dangerous the moment I stepped on that plane. At least now it will be on my terms." Silence followed her defiance until finally a voice from the corner said, "She's right. Fear feeds them, but defiance starves them." The plan shifted like gears catching. Tomorrow Lena would fly again, not hidden but exposed. Daring them to strike, night fell thick and restless. Lena lay awake in a secure hotel room staring at the ceiling, every creak of the walls a reminder of how fragile bodies are. She remembered the man in 3A sneering, the woman in row 5 whispering about rehearsal, and now the unseen face from the lounge who had watched her with cold detachment. She knew the next attack was already in motion. Sleep never came, only the slow, steady hammer of determination in her chest. Morning brought sharp suits and sharper tension. The boarding pass in her hand marked with the same cursed row, her name printed bold above it. She stepped onto the jet bridge, flanked by security disguised as passengers. Her pulse racing, but her gaze steady, she slid into the seat and felt the weight of every stare. The cabin filled with ordinary travelers unaware of the storm stitched into their flight. Her fingers brushed the seam of the cushion, searching, waiting, daring. Halfway through boarding, a man paused in the aisle beside her seat. Tall, expression unreadable, he carried no bag, his hands empty. He looked down at her and said in a voice almost polite, "That was mine." Lena locked eyes with him and replied firmly, "Not today." The agent across the aisle shifted. Passengers jostled impatiently, and the man smiled thin and cold before moving 2 rows back, sitting without another word, but Lena knew that smile. She had seen it in boardrooms before deals turned to knives. It was the smile of someone certain of his own power. The doors sealed. The engines growled awake. The plane rolled forward. Lena's phone vibrated one last time with a single new message. No words, only an image of her own seat number with a countdown ticking down from 10. Her breath caught. The number fell to 9, then 8. She turned her head sharply toward the man 2 rows back who now leaned forward ever so slightly watching her. And in that suspended heartbeat, she realized the collapse they had promised was no metaphor. It was written into the seconds draining away in her hand. The engines roared, the cabin tilted, the countdown burned, and Lena's whisper cut through the rising panic in her veins, "We end this now." The countdown on Lena's phone burned into her vision as the plane surged down the runway. 10 became 7, 7 became 5. Her pulse matched each second. She gripped the armrest, forcing herself not to scream. Her eyes locked on the man 2 rows back, whose lips curved into that quiet smile again. Passengers chatted casually around them, unaware of the storm about to break. She leaned forward, pressing the phone into the agent's hand across the aisle. His eyes widened as he saw the screen, and in a single motion he signaled to the cabin crew, who reached for the interphone with shaking fingers. The captain's voice filled the cabin. Aborted takeoff. Immediate stop. The engine screamed, then howled into silence as brakes locked hard. Bodies jerked forward, drinks spilled, startled cries rising. The plane shuddered to a violent halt halfway down the runway. Blue lights exploded outside as emergency trucks raced closer. Chaos bloomed inside, but Lena stayed fixed on the man 2 rows back. He was already rising, his hand sliding toward the floor beneath his seat. The agent lunged across the aisle, tackling him into the row. Passengers screamed, bags tumbled, and Lena sprang forward with a strength she didn't know she had. Together, they wrestled the man into the aisle. His face twisted in fury. He spat, "You were supposed to fall. The world was supposed to see you burn." Lena shoved his wrist down just as he tried to press something clutched tight in his palm. The device clattered free, small, ugly, blinking, rolling across the carpet toward a pair of terrified shoes. The agent snatched it up with gloved hands and bellowed, "Secure the cabin." Secure the cabin, passengers were herded back. The flight attendants pale but firm, holding people steady, and the plane became a cage of pounding hearts outside. Armed officers stormed aboard. The man was dragged out thrashing and cursing. The blinking device sealed in a secure case, the air thick with the aftermath of fear. Lena sank into the nearest seat chest, heaving, sweat damp at her temple. And for a long moment, the only sound was her own breathing, matched by the trembling of the passengers around her. Lives that had nearly ended because her name had been written on a list, symbols targeted like pawns in a cruel game. The agent crouched in front of her, voice low. "You saved them again." But Lena shook her head. "No, we saved ourselves. Because this isn't about one seat or one billionaire. It's about every stranger strapped into a metal tube, trusting the world not to collapse around them." He nodded gravely and said, "We'll keep hunting, but tonight they lost. and in her chest the words echoed like a fragile victory. Hours later, after statements and flashbulbs and endless questions, Lena found herself alone at last in a quiet observation deck overlooking the grounded plains, city lights blinking like distant fires beyond. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman different from the one who boarded yesterday. Stronger but scarred, she whispered to the night. Sometimes survival means standing when fear tells you to sit. Sometimes it means refusing to bend even when the world tries to break you. And the words settled into her bones like a vow. Her phone buzzed one final time. A message with no threats, no countdown, only 2 words typed clean and sharp. Not over. She closed her eyes, drew a breath that tasted of steel and resolve, and whispered back into the dark, "Let them come, because I am still standing," and for the first time since the seat was stolen and the flight collapsed, Lena felt not just the weight of fear but the fire of defiance, knowing she had transformed from target into weapon, from victim into voice, and that whatever war had begun, it would not end with her silence. The end.